and welcome to the July installment of our 2022 Phosphorescence Poetry Series. To Emily Dickinson, the term phosphorescence described a divine spark or an illuminating light. And the Emily Dickinson Museum launched this series during the pandemic in 2021 when we were most in need of some illumination. And the series celebrates the power of poetry to spark the imagination and ignite transformation. And we're so thrilled to be bringing you another year of virtual readings, running monthly now through December, bringing you established and emerging poets from all over the world. My name is Brooke Steinhauser. I'm the program director at the Emily Dickinson Museum. I'm just thrilled to be with you tonight. Since we can't see you, we hope that you'll consider sharing your words of affirmation and appreciation for our poets. And you can start right now if you'd like. You can chime in the chat and let us know where it is you're tuning in from this afternoon, this evening, wherever you are. Lots of folks already. Hello, Utah, from San Francisco and Georgia and Detroit. I know some of our poets have some Detroit connections themselves. Some Connecticut folks, which is fitting because we have some Connecticut poets tonight. Rhode Island, Los Angeles. Oh, New Mexico, just wonderful. Thank you so much, everybody, for choosing to be with us tonight. We're honored. So please do note that we will be enabling Zoom's auto transcription feature, which generates closed captioning to the best of the computer's ability. There will likely be some errors occasionally in the transcript along the way, and you might choose to turn that feature on or off. To do that, just go to the live transcript button at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar. Tonight's program is going to last about 1 hour, and we'll start with the readings and end with some conversation. We do invite you to participate by adding any questions that you have for the poets to the question and answer feature, the Q&A feature as we go. That's a button that's also available in your Zoom toolbar at the bottom of your screen typically. So now, without further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce tonight's poets to you. And all three of these poets are zooming in tonight from the great state of Connecticut, which is most certainly made greater by the fact that they live and write there. So first up, we're going to hear from Terry Bonhorst Blackhawk, who is founder and executive director of Detroit's Inside Out Literary Arts Project, a Poets in Schools program dedicated to encouraging young people to think broadly, create bravely, and share their voices with the wider world. Terry's poetry collections include Body and Field, which came out in 1999, Escape Artist in 2003, and which was selected by Molly Peacock for the John Chiardi Prize, The Dropped Hand in 2011, and The Light Between in 2012. And there are 3 additional chapbooks. You can learn more about these works and more about Terry at her website, which we're going to put in the chat for you. Next, we'll hear from Dolores Hayden, an urban historian and poet who is professor emerita at Yale University. And her books on the American landscape include The Power of Place, Urban Landscapes as Public History, and Building Suburbia. Her poems appear in many journals and anthologies, including Poetry, Raritan, Ecotone, Yale Review, The Common, which is, of course, a publication that comes out of Emily Dickinson's own home in Amherst, Massachusetts, and Best American Poetry. And she's the author of 3 poetry collections, American Yard, Nymph, Dun, and Spinner, and Exuberance, set in the earliest years of American aviation when daredevil pilots, women and men, thrilled spectators who had never seen an airplane before. So more about Dolores at her website, which we are putting in the chat as we speak. And then lastly, we will hear from Marilyn Nelson, who is the author of translator of 17 poetry books and the memoir, How I Discovered Poetry. She's also the author of The Fields of Praise, New and Selected Poems, which won the 1998 Poets Prize, Carver, A Life in Poems, which won the 2001 Boston Globe Hornbook Award and the Flora Stieglitz Strauss Award, and Fortune's Bones, which was a Coretta Scott King honor book and won the Lion and the Unicorn Award for Excellence in North American Poetry. She is also the author of the biography of Augusta Savage, The Shape of a Sculptor's Life, which is out this year. Nelson's honors include 2 National Endowment for the Arts Creative Writing Fellowships, the 1990 Connecticut Arts Award, a Fulbright Teaching Fellowship, a fellowship from the J.S. Guggenheim Memorial Foundation, and the Frost Medal. She was the Poet Laureate of the state of Connecticut from 2001 to 2006. So we'll post links to the works of these poets in the chat tonight as they read. Poets, thank you so much for being with us. It is a thrill to have you. And we're going to turn it right over to Terry.
Will unmute myself. Thank you so much, Brooke and Anna and everyone at the museum for making this possible. I am so moved to be here, and especially in the Dickinson aura. And it's a joy to read with my dear Connecticut poetry friends, Dolores and Marilyn, who have become my good colleagues and comrades since I moved here from Detroit in 2016. So I thought I would sort of follow a strand of creatures, because there's so many creatures in Dickinson's poetry. So my first few poems are going to take a little look at them. You can think of all the bees and birds and snakes and frogs. Everything in her poems was alive. So this poem is called Emily's Bee, and it has as an epigraph this from Henry David Thoreau. Stars are the apexes of what triangles? Emily's bee. Clover's too small for him, but the bee balm's ample petals present throat after throat of sweetness. He's a rare centurion of bees, larger by a factor of 10 than his fellows drifting by. And I like to think her lines bob with him, this languid yo-yo with his methodical drowse, probing like a hummingbird the size of a masculine thumb. Black patent puppet with wild yellow fuzz, unconcerned with pedigrees of honey, he turns blossoms to stanzas as controlled and spasmodic as her own, and I'd see him as a messenger from beyond the circles that confine us, the frames our hearts beat in. So let the bumblebee triangulate. Let's reverse light and dark and make him a benighted bobbing star, plucked out of time and placed in the space between us. What better connection than a fat bee, one day in summer, casting random constellations across a flower bed, a velvet calculus I can almost touch. And that was from my book, Escape Artist. And I have another creature here from The Light Between, which is a book that a large part of which deals with a very difficult divorce and abandonment and betrayal. So anyway, here's a creature. And I wrote this in Florida in a workshop at the Atlantic Center for the Arts when it was very, very cold and they had a sudden freeze and the reptiles were freezing in place. I think of my ex-husband standing in sunlight, but it's a frozen tree frog I hold in my hand, capturing the evening sun as it slants through the palmettos. He's hollowed, stiffened in position, and I balance him on my desktop, poised and posed like a football lineman, ready for the hike. One leg stretches twice the length of the forward crouching body, making a stem I can twirl between my fingers. The other forms a Z, its toenails barely touching the desk as if he's about to spring. Decay would not have left him so fixed and exact, like a paper lantern or a cicada's husk. Some abrupt and thoroughgoing freeze must have caught him thus, mid-stride, his claws still clinging to the bark. Hold him up to the sun, the spine's an X-ray, the skull a dark spoon above half-closed eyes, crescent slits admitting light. The dried pod of him fairly glows. Off. is called Overheard Among the Arthropods. And I have an epigraph here from Moon, barely touching the sand, to recognize ourselves without these shells and think of the pulpy creatures who used to live inside. 2, jellyfish. No shell necessary when one is gelatinous, carried by and through currents, cozy, barely visible in the diffuse light. Beached now, my shifting shape recalls bubbles blown through mucilage, squeezed from a tube, strings sticky and shiny as these tentacles now dissolving into sand. 3, driftwood. One is attractive enough in retrospect, even washed up on shore, genes determine the degree of polish. Take these whirls, some resultant mix of experience and inclination, shadow and sheen. 4, scarab. Would you like to come scrawl with me? We could be artists whose signatures get left behind. Desire takes such droll design. Think of antennae as bits of wing. 5, submersibles. We bury ourselves above the line of the tide. Feel the sole of your boot press back from our roof, a quick waterlogged medium, this tensile suspension between one ground and another. And in addition to seashore creatures, we have birds. I'm a kind of a birder myself. And after my divorce, I moved to downtown Detroit, Lafayette Park, which is not far from the Detroit River, which is a wonderful source of sustenance and strength and release from the day. And it's also on the birding flyway. So we would get the birds coming through in migration. And this one is called the woodcock. It's important to know that the Detroit River is was the border between freedom and slavery in the last 2 centuries. And I quote from Whitman in here a bit from Song of Myself, from a section where he purports to take in and shelter a runaway slave. The woodcock. Weary of the daily terror, I turn to the mystic body of the bird. A woodcock I found, crackling the twigs and ivy, barely escaped from a cat's clumsy claws. I feared for the odd angle of its wing, the surprised flopping it made there. But I did not fear the extreme length of its beak or the eyes popping diametrically on either side of its head. I loved the feathers' deckled edges and the light weight it made as I scooped it up and put it, limpsy and weak, into an old canvas book bag. And when I released it from that soft, safe space sometime later out on Belle Isle, I missed it at once, as one would miss a friend. It whirred straight up, explosively, toward freedom on the other side of the river, its pulse now gone from my hands. And here's a poem, because I love Belle Isle and the river so much. This is called Ice Music. Ice melt, ice lace, ice breaking up upstream, coming down from up north in variegated quilts of flows. No instance act, this crumbling, an entire season sends broken continents our way. Once miles wide chunks break and bob or push up against the shore in spun sugar turrets. They rise, falls, glistening, dissolving, ice lace, ice music. I seem to hear a tremolo in the trees, but it's March, no leaves, no breeze, just the score for the scene before me. Silvery glissandos rising from a streaming swarm of glinting creatures herded by the current in a living, touching, clinking, singing surge. So I have a new chapbook coming out from Alice Green Press. The title is this poem, Mommy, Mommy. After the divorce, I was fortunate to find a late life love, and the artist Neil Frankenhauser. That's his piece of work over my shoulder. He passed away in 2019, but I have these poems and this book coming out that memorializes him. This is a haibun, and it captures the sense of sitting by the river, the Maumee River, which is where he went to paint endlessly. I mean, he was probably the most dedicated artist I ever knew. And he painted hundreds and hundreds of pictures of his, what he called sacred river. Maumee, Maumee, fish leap and splash. Grasses' heads toss in the wind. The boat over weighted down willows swish and sigh, and the river itself, moment by moment, now rippled, now smooth, with its swoop of swallows, traffic from the bridge, and endless roar of sea. Maumee, Maumee, I sing it. Oriole hopping from branch to branch, small leaf cutter on the edge of my page, fingers stained with the green of an oil pastel, house finch weaving its song, song sparrow cranking up in the understory. I sing the warble rush flow, gritting of teeth orange truck rushing past the nothing that is here except these gnats dancing in front of my eyes. I am long gone water from the bottle, orgasmic fizz, tornado at night passing us by. I wade the water, but do not go in. So yes, Payne's grays a kind of bluish black, excellent for painting stormy skies. And yes, sun sparkle, flashes of dilatory bobble, flish, a fish flips up from the surface. Smooth the paint on the panel, sweetie, dive, won't you? And don't argue. My tone is your tone, your town, your tongue. Kayaks floating past, and Sunday afternoons by our own Grand Jetée. Pigeons that fly up, the necessary dark. No notes, just the way that warbler bounced and climbed each available twig. I think I've got time for two more. Quick ones. Early elegy. Of course, I know it's time to come to terms. You are ash, memory, the grit and grain we scattered from your painting spot onto the surface of your beloved river, not far from that small historic house we came close to buying. Where I live now, I sit and look out from a 3-season porch, much like the one you admired in Maumee. You saw yourself making art there, grateful for northern light from the uncurtained windows, and sometimes I see you here, busy or laughing, doing crosswords or finding new angles to sketch among rooftops and flower pots, making ordinary days as ordinary people who love one another are wont to do, speculating about the breeze or the sky. And finally, I know it's bad form to write about dreams. That is the title rolls into the poem. I know it's bad form to write about dreams, but reader, I trust I won't lose you when I say my love came to me last night and we set out for the river. I climbed onto my bike, unridden since the spill that smashed my ankle years before. He'd been crippled, but moved along smoothly, the lower half of his right leg replaced by a bionic rod. He sped ahead and soon was gone, but I wobbled on and found him, sashaying through traffic at a busy intersection. It got quiet, and we headed back to his cluttered house. What he said to me then disappeared with the dream, but as we peered from his door, down through the piled up years of his art, I'm sure he heard my promise. I'll come in and stay with you, I told him. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, my friends. It's so lovely to see so many friends on here and just so grateful. Thank you, Brooke.
Thank you, Terry. That was wonderful. And I especially like the poem about ice. I'm very pleased to be part of the Phosphorescence Reading Series, and I am delighted, of course, to read with Terry Blackhawk and Marilyn Nelson. As a gardener, Emily Dickinson must have known the Victorian language of the flowers, the code used to convey messages through the choice of flowers presented to particular people. I'm going to begin with Language of the Flowers, a poem that won the Emily Dickinson Award from the PSA many years ago. The epigraph to this poem comes from a letter Dickinson wrote to friends. The career of flowers differs from our own only in inaudibleness. Language of the Flowers. Affections jonquils can bespeak, red tulips love, strategic meek. She shears some lilies for a carafe, adds jasmine sprays to telegraph hesitant sensuality, planned pleasures neighbors need not see. A full-blown rose, meet me tonight, placed over two buds warns secret flight. Lush honeysuckle may confuse, since bonds of love might still refuse. If she's twined sprigs of dark green holly, foresight with columbine for folly. And if some love has proven false, fallen for one of her friends or worse, it's lobelia, malevolence, dark-stemmed blue buds, small ones. She's tense, troubled, teary with dismay. She adds no card to this bouquet. Dead leaves spell melancholy. Season favors sour whortleberry, treason. I'm an urban historian. I've written about everyday American places, from colonial port cities to the highways, malls, and tracts of our own time. Sometimes a research trip also leads to a poem. With County in July was published in The Common, a wonderful journal based in Amherst. After the word stare, you'll hear the words of photographer Walker Evans. With County in July. So here's a board and batten house, a wall of planks with ragged ends behind the windows splitting sills. And here 5 siblings form a row, straggling across the wooden porch. The boy frowns down and looks away, but his sisters pose for me. The tallest raises her arm, juts her left hip, hooks her bare toes over the edge. 2 first-grade girls, gap-toothed, grin wide, and one, her elbows high, leans right against the smallest child, hair chopped in crooked bangs, barefoot, sack dress. It will be years before I frame family snapshots of my own. Road dust rolls red as I size up more faded farms and the courthouse square, where I shoot storefronts that sell old clothes, used shoes, some dented pots and pans, as if I rode with Walker Evans touring Depression poverty. With County in July, stare. Day after day, it is the way to educate your eye and more. Stare, pry, listen, eavesdrop. August, I turn back north toward home, still steering down those rural roads, arriving at that weathered house. No one has heard of Walmart yet, though down in Rogers, Arkansas, Sam Walton's launched his discount city. Scouting locations in his plane, he aims to move into Missouri. He plans to expand in Oklahoma, aims to discount the material remains of small towns everywhere. These days I'm working on a new book of poems about American places. Here's In the Middle Lane, Leaving New Haven. Dust covers behind the billboard. We want your scrap gold. Behind the imported oil on the tank farm, the rusting metal on the export pier, the oversized flags on the auto dealer's lot. 4 out of 5 commuters drive alone. In the left lane, a black bus, shrink-wrapped with characters for luck, hurtles past me toward the casino. On the right, a white limo accelerates to a wedding. Who is the risk taker looking for grace? A cell tower marks frolic talk as I exit toward narrow roads that wind and rise and fall. I steer into the shapes of time. River Street, Water Street curve with fishermen's work. Bleats Island Road weaves where farmers grew salt hay, and the last of the light fades on bone-colored Spartina. Who is the survivor mapping history? On Colonial Road, a developer has been clearing for new houses. Dispossessed, a doe and a buck wander onto the asphalt. Pay attention, braking hard, headlights high. I hear an owl. I might as well be an owl, hooting at the ice, lecturing winter. Snow coats the sand on the beach. Snow drifts over the seawall next to the Sound. On Cove Lane, my house resists the January wind. Windows dark. My house is as cold as only a widow's can be. On the porch, shovel, rock salt, firewood. Back in 1910, aviation was carnival entertainment. It's a long time before it's safe transportation. And Exuberance, my most recent book, is a collection of poems in the voices of pilots who flew at fairs and racetracks for audiences of Americans who'd never seen an airplane. I'm going to read several of these short poems, and I'll begin with the instructor giving a lesson. Flying lesson, clouds. Focus on the shape. Cirrus, a curl, stratus, a layer, cumulus, a heap. Cumulus, a small cloud. Cumulus, humulus, a fine day to fly. Incus, the anvil, stay grounded. Nimbus rain, be careful. Don't take off near nimbus stratus, a shapeless layer of rain, hail, ice, or snow. Ice weighs on the blades of your propeller, weighs on the entering edge of your wings. Read a cloud, decode it. Watch for clouds closing under you. The sky opens in a breath, shuts in a heartbeat. The next one is in the voice of Lincoln Beachy, daredevil pilot, one of the first. Birdman. Left school at 12, can't follow physics. I'm just a man stepping out on the law of gravity, making my living, leaving and reappearing. Morning, evening, I am the man who owns the sky. Risk improves my mood and the money's good. I burn my last drop of fuel to climb 2 miles above Chicago, ride a dead stick all the way down, proclaim the gospel of wings, heaven pricked by human invention. I spin a holy ruckus in the sky, racket my blessing above root beer, red hots, popcorn. Give me 100,000 pairs of uplifted eyes. Amen. And here's Betty Scott, bird woman. What man claims God does not allow women to fly? Glenn Curtis says he won't teach women, but I know motors. My father gave me the keys to the Cadillac when I was 13 to keep me out of trouble, he said. Yes, I'm a finishing school girl, Miss Blanche Stewart Scott of Rochester, 5'1", dark red hair. If I marry myself to a rackety engine, of course it will attract publicity. I partner my plane in a ballroom of air. Clouds nudge my feet as they shadow slip across lakes and farms 200 yards below. There are many adventures in exuberance. I'm going to just read one more pilot's tale. Tomboy stories. Spare me, petticoat pilot, lipstick flyer, winged suffragette, flapping flyer, ladybird, and tomboy of the air. Betty Scott ripped up that poster. Tomboy meant a loud, loose woman to her, not someone up to her elbows in engine oil. A reporter called me tomboy too. Slim, yellow hair, blue eyes, looks like some high school girl. I was 25, a skilled pilot. Back when that reporter thought I should be scribbling homework, I stunted for a crowd at Narragansett, flew in a drizzle. They handed me 500 damp, crumpled singles, way too little for the risk. And the biggest risk? Men sabotage women's planes, slash wires, drop a tool to jam the controls. When Bessie Coleman cracked up, they found a wrench. Watch out for the guy who drains your gas tank, spikes your fuel, claims it's a joke, claims women pilots have no sense of humor. We can mark the ballot, steer the ship. Air races are for men only. Time we tomboys got organized. My final poem is Exuberance. It's the title poem in the book, linking the stunt pilot's jargon to the words that financiers used to describe the great crash of 1929. Exuberance sips bootleg gin from a garter flask with the ruby monogram E. She wears a red dress one size too small. Eyes wide, she flirts with everyone. Dares Lincoln Beachy to run his tank dry, ride a dead stick all the way down. She watches Ormer Locklear climb out of the cockpit 200 feet up, tap dance on his upper wing as the houses of honest families with their square fenced yards slide below his shuffle. An oval pond winks in the sun like a zero. Exuberance is a show-off like Ruth Law. She speaks French like Bessie Coleman. These aviators predict every American will fly. Exuberance believes everybody ought to be rich. She gets stock tips from her manicurist, call loans from her broker, orders shares in investment trusts. Why not? This nation is all about growth. Growth and leverage. Look at the skyscrapers shooting up, men rivet steel floor after floor, high-speed elevators spring through the cores, planes soar over them all. Wall Street is wing walking. Call it barnstormer capitalism. Soon the bankers and the brokers will steal the aviators' lexicon, claim their own tailspins, nosedives, crack-ups, graph their own doomsday cycles. Wonder how everything blue sky stayed up so long. Exuberance buys more stock on margin. Volume runs high. The ticker tape can't keep up. Higher, higher. Thank you.
I am so pleased to read with my friends this evening. And nobody has yet used the term I would use for the three of us together, which is running buddies. These are my running buddies in Connecticut, and it's been great fun to hang out together. Should I just read? Okay. My work has mostly been based in historical or scientific research. I seldom write about my own private life, but one thread of my private life is the story I'm going to read from this evening. And I read from it, gosh, about 20 years ago in New York, my first New York reading of this story. And a man came up to me afterwards and congratulated me and said he would have liked my book. I was reading from a new book. He would have liked my book better if he believed, if he was allowed to believe it was a work of fiction. He didn't like it because I said it was true. So let me say that. I claim this as a true story, but if you prefer to think of it as fiction, please go ahead and believe that. My story is a love story that began in the 60s when I met this man who I believe is the love of my life at a party in 1966. We were introduced. I held out my hand to shake his hand. It was that kind of world I lived in. And he turned my hand over and kissed the back of my hand, and then he kissed my arm up to my shoulder, and then he pulled back and said over and over again, "I'll never cease loving you. I'll never cease loving you." Okay, that's how this story began. It had a huge pause because a couple of years later, after nothing ever happened between the two of us, I had a boyfriend, he had a girlfriend, that was life. He came over right after we graduated from university. He came over, and long story short, he was leaving, saying goodbye. He was leaving the country. And at the door, he said, "Will you sleep with me?" And I was so taken aback that having waited for 2 years for this question, I was so taken aback. I laughed and I couldn't stop laughing. And he got on a motorcycle he had borrowed for the evening and rode away, and he couldn't hear me calling him. And he was leaving the country next day, and I didn't know where he was for 20 years. And 20 years later, I told my then husband about this incident, and he said, "Thank you, Roger." He said, "We've got to find him. We really have to find him. He may be hearing your laughter echoing even now." So I had been told several years after graduation that my friend had entered a monastery. And so we started a monastery search. Really an interesting experience, and found him. And then I wrote to him every day for a year. And then he sent a telegram saying, "Never ceased loving you." And then came a letter saying that he had been on retreat on an island and hadn't gotten any mail. So when he got home, he got all of my letters at once. So that's our story. And now I'm going to read some poems. Going to start with the only poem I've written about Emily Dickinson. It's called Emily Dickinson's Defunct. She used to pack poems in her hip pocket. Under all the gray old lady clothes, she was dressed for action. She had hair, imagine, in certain places, and believe me, she smelled human on a hot summer day. Stalking snakes or counting the 1,000 motes in sunlight, she walked just like an Indian. She was New England's favorite daughter. She could pray like the devil. She was a two-fisted woman, this babe. All the flies just stood around and buzzed when she died. Thank you. I'm sorry, I got the message about starting the video, but now it started. Okay. Okay, so that's Emily Dickinson, and the rest of what I read will instead be about the story of Marilyn Nelson and Jacques Brown, who is a former Benedictine monk and now an ordained Catholic priest who lives on an island in the Indian Ocean. And I can't tell you how amazing it was that I found him there. Okay, this first poem, I found him there. I discovered the day after I got his telegram, I discovered completely by accident that there was an exchange program between my university, the University of Connecticut, and the university where he lives. He lives in Mauritius. There's an exchange program. So within 48 hours of hearing from him, I had a way to be there, to fly there. And so the first poems I'm going to read are about visiting my love, the hermit monk in the monastery he has spent all of his life building. He's building a monastery. Okay, so this is a poem about being in the little oratory of his monastery for evening prayers. And the creatures I'm beating off in my imagination are my children and my then husband. This is called the Prayer of Silence. I fought off the octopi and the great white shark and drifted into silence. On the far wall, a glass brick cross filters early morning light. A veteran candle on the low altar, a jar of dried grasses, a painted cross on an easel, a sad-eyed icon of a woman holding a baby. High on the right wall, a plain wooden cross. A man on a wicker stool, his head bowed, his hands folded. He stands, opens his arms, looks up, closes his eyes, and takes in radiance. Okay, so while I was there, he happened to be reading a book of the wisdom sayings of the first Christian hermit, I guess it would go, contemplatives who lived in the desert in Egypt in something like the 3rd or 4th century. They're called the Desert Fathers, and their sayings are called apothegms. So he's reading to me the apothegms of the Desert Fathers, several of them a day, and they're really wonderful. And the hermits are all called Abba something, Abba meaning father. And as a kind of an in-joke, I started calling him Abba Jacob. His name is Jacques, so he's Abba Jacques, Abba Jacob. And these are imitations of the apothegms of the Desert Fathers. I'm sorry, okay. Abba Jacob at bat. A young visitor wearing an angel's cap sat down cross-legged at Abba Jacob's feet. Abba Jacob said, "That baseball cap reminds me of the man who died in my arms when I was 23. His last words were, 'Put out the light.'" Why baseball caps? Abba Jacob rose and took his guest's cap, snapped it twice against his forearm, put it on, and straightened the peak. He said, "Because they remind us to live." This is called Abba Jacob Gets Down. Abba Jacob said, "There was once a desert father who had a bad novice. One day, the novice died and went to hell. That night, the Abba went into ecstasy. He had a vision of his novice surrounded by fire. 'My son,' he said, 'I pity you for being there.' 'That's all right, Father,' the novice replied. 'I'm sitting on 3 bishops.'" Let's see. 42. This is, again, these are all imitation apothegms from the first time I visited the monastery. This is called Everyday Holiness. And I become Amma Mama in these poems. He's Abba Jacob and I'm Amma Mama. "Let's have a quarrel like other people do," said Amma Mama. Abba Jacob said, "All right, I'll try if you like." "That roll of film you ruined when you opened my camera? Well, it turned out to be a blessing in disguise. The only shot left that they could print was the only one I really cared about. And look, now there's a rainbow." Okay, and then I am going to read that's from a book which is completely, entirely about the history of this love story. It's called Magnificat. It was published in 1994. And now I'm going to read from the Fields of Praise. It's my other two selected, new and selected collections have, sorry, I'm trying to think 2 things at the same time. They continue the story. So now I think I have about 4 minutes to read 10 poems. Let me see. I'm going to read 126. These are about a second visit to the monastery at La Salette. And this is a few years later, and we had been together. I think we met in France when he goes to France frequently. He travels around the Francophone world, giving talks about meditation, about contemplation. So we had met And then this is the second visit to his home. And he's picking me up at the airport. Abba Jacob hums quietly, negotiating traffic from the airport. White sleeves rolled back from his tanned hands on the wheel. White skirt from belt to barefoot sandals on the pedals. Amma Mama hums too, watching landscapes grow and go. A truck has stopped on the edge of the highway, its load of fish spilled, its driver laughing, fish on the pavement and grass as laughing men toss silver arcs back into the truck or ride off on mopeds and bicycles with fish on their laps, in baskets, fish under their arms. For a passing moment, the air seems to flash with fish, and happy yells join two old fools humming. They exchange a quick, delighted glance. They're driving to his place, a fieldstone monastery surrounded by wind-rattled cane. The guest house has a new veranda. The well is 20 meters deep. There's a pool with little carp, and 3 sheep now mow weeds near the hidden hermitage. When Amma Mama has seen everything, Abba Jacob walks her to her room and bows outside her door. He says, I'd planned to have flowers here for you and everything clean and fresh, but I was called away before I finished sweeping, so you have a pile of dust in the middle of the floor. That's much more symbolic, don't you think? Mass is at 5. Amma Mama bows, laughing, and straightens to watch him walk away. She remembers his shoulders. Fish everywhere. Fish like sunlight from the afternoon sky. I think tell me when to stop, will you? Okay, this is called Blessing the Boats. Abba Jacob said, did I ever tell you about the time I was asked to bless the fishing boats? I got to the appointed beach at the appointed time in my long white tunic, of course, and discovered the beach had been taken over by a crowd of Italian tourists, most of them women and topless. Luckily, or unluckily for me, considering the circumstances, they were all beautiful. 1 or 2 of them. Well, what could I do? I just walked through them. They parted before me like the waves of the Red Sea, silent and watching. It was almost all I could do to keep a straight face and look straight ahead. I thought such a fancy-dressed audience deserved a grand gesture, so I walked right in, shoes and all, to my chest in the sea. Inwardly bursting with laughter, I stroked the nearest prow and blessed the boats with a sign of the cross. Then I turned and blessed the beach. I didn't laugh until I got home. They're probably still talking about it. I think I've overstayed my time, so I'm just going to read a last poem and get off the stage before I'm asked to leave. This is called The Simple Wisdom. Abba Jacob said, there's a big difference between the mentalities of magic and of alliance. People who spend their lives searching for God have a magical mentality. They need a sign, a proof, a puff of smoke, an irrefutable miracle. People who have an alliance mentality know God by loving. So thanks.
Oh my gosh. Oh, just what an absolutely thrilling evening of poetry. I'm buoyed by all of these words and hearing these incredible stories from these incredible storytellers. It's just such an absolute privilege. So I do hope maybe we just have a few more minutes so that I can ask you all some questions. I think we might have a couple questions in the chat, so I'll do my best to address those as well. We're going to be turning the chat back on, so if you are just dying to tell these poets how deeply you felt their words tonight, we would love to hear from you there in the chat. And again, feel free to pop any more questions into the Q&A. I'm going to kick us off. I'm particularly struck by this image that Marilyn has given us of Emily Dickinson dressed for action, and she's packing poems in her pocket. All of you have a really strong interest in Dickinson. We heard some of that tonight. You have unique connections to various, ongoing efforts to share her legacy. Terry and Marilyn, you are both on an advisory committee right now that supports the development of a new podcast called The Slave Is Gone. It discusses the Apple TV hit show Dickinson. Dolores, you shared your absolutely glorious poem, The Language of Flowers, tonight, which won the Emily Dickinson Award from the Poetry Society of America. So what is it about Emily Dickinson that keeps you coming back for more?
Well, Brooke, she's just the most amazing poet, and one can read her many, many times and always discover something new, something wonderful. There's a sense of sound, there's a sense of surprise. There's always a very, very deft kind of rhyming. And I don't think that there's really anyone greater in the history of American poetry.
Yeah, I would agree. I just keep going over in my mind is her poem To Make a Prairie.
Mhm.
Takes one clover and a bee, a clover and a bee, one clover and a bee, and reverie. The reverie alone will do if bees are few. But that beginning, to make a prairie, it's so bold, and it reminds me of, I think she's just very bold and very original in her thinking. That it's just kind of stunning. I mean, she also said, the brain is wider than the sky. So she had a sense of her own power in every poem. I really do love her. So it's so nice to be nearby too, to be in Connecticut, and I can get up to Amherst from time to time. So
I have one of the nicest experiences I've had as a teacher was taking taking my undergraduate major authors course on Emily Dickinson up to Amherst. And it was really delightful that the docents in the house sort of backed away when my students started telling them things. I said, oh, wow, well, why don't you teach us? It was a wonderful experience. And what I think Emily Dickinson, what she says about the poet and about poetry are true in her case. Poetry is phosphorescence. It's light from the heavens. It's like something touches your head and your brain explodes. It's like seeing someone across the room and having your lives connected for the next 50 years. That there are things that happen that are explosions at the, I think this is from Robert Bly, explosions at the waterline. and some people see them. Poets tend to see them, but not all. And to be able to help other people see them. Not everyone is born with a gift of, let's call it poetic vision or spiritual vision. Not everybody's born with that, but there are people who are, or who have arrived at it and who feel it's their job to help other people see these things, to show other people. That's all of the poems that she wrote about being a poet. They're essentially about showing people every moment you go outside and look at your ordinary garden that's there all the time. But if you look, you see the whole world is there. Blah, 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 blah. So I think anyone who reads more than 50 of her poems has to become a Dickinsonian. That's what happened to my students. They were just converted to Emily Dickinsonism. So
I love when you said there are explosions of the mind, you know, Dickinson's another definition of poetry.
exactly.
If I feel physically as if the top of my head were taken off, I know that is poetry, she said.
Exactly.
So I think you hit the nail on the head.
Yeah,
Marilyn,
yeah.
I really appreciated what you said about, you know, there are people who see the world differently and they are poets, and Emily Dickinson was one of them. And this next question is going to ask you more about that. You know, tonight we heard poems from you about historical and emotional truths. We heard poems about landscapes and skyscapes and landscapes of loss, poems about creatures. Dickinson, of course, had similar interests. You cited that all along, all of you. A few first lines come to mind. Witchcraft was hung in history. A narrow fellow in the grass. There's a certain slant of light on winter afternoons. So one of the biggest perceptions that we work to overcome, I think, at the museum is that Dickinson was sort of a disconnected person, you know, because of becoming reclusive later in life. And instead we try to illustrate that kind of keen attention to the world that she lived in. Whether that was, you know, as near as her garden or as far as some kind of, you know, distant emotional place. And that's so evident in her words today, I think, and in what you've called up in thinking about Dickinson. So what kind of awareness do you think it is that poets need to have to do their work in today's world?
They all need a cat.
No, in her world, you needed a dog.
That's right.
That's true.
Arlo was her dog.
Right.
I just think of her insistence on her individuality in the face of domestic expectations and conventional ways of being for women in the world. She wasn't having it. And I think that kind of independence is just, I don't know, something that gives me a lot of, it's the idea of one's essence is being an artist, being a creative voice, a creative person. Just think of her saying she's a no-hoper when it comes to, you know, New England revivalism, or her comment about the dimity convictions these gentle women bear. She was not going to be pigeonholed in any kind of particular way. So I just admire that.
I think it helped that she attended Mount Holyoke College for a year. I looked into a little bit about the history of Mount Holyoke because I am also a graduate of Mount Holyoke, and it was a place in her day that ran on a very, very demanding schedule, but with quite a strong level of instruction in the sciences. And I think there she extended the excellent education she'd already had in Amherst and was sustained for the rest of her life with the kinds of habits of inquiry that she developed, and the sense that perhaps she would be an uncommon woman, which became a phrase that the school used to describe its graduates.
I've spent most of my career writing about people who were gifted with extraordinariness, like George Washington Carver, and then most recently Augusta Savage, who started making little sculptures when she was a toddler out of mud in the yard. And there are people who are chosen for some things. That's one of the facts I love about the West African tradition of the griot, who, you have a newborn baby and you ask the griot or maybe an elder for a name, and they hold this baby and look at it and choose the name that will fit the life the child will grow up into. Like, you meet people whose names are, he will go far. And there are people who are just born with gifts like that and who learn how to live with them. For many people, it's at least half a curse, because it sets you apart from everybody else, and you get punished for that in some ways. But I'm sorry, I've lost the point of, I got caught up with the griot and the baby, and now I can't get back to Emily Dickinson and being a poet. But it's, for me, it's a matter of being picked out. It's a matter of being chosen to be an artist. As I'm only glad that Emily Dickinson wasn't born in our century, because I think she would have gotten waylaid by science. I think she would be so filled with a abundance of things to learn, things to know, that she would have had a hard time taking a few minutes to jot down these little rhyming ditties. They would have seemed, I think, if she was an astrophysicist right now, or a oceanographer.
I think she could have done it all, Marilyn.
You
I
think
She
so?
was just an exceptional mind and an exceptional imagination. I don't have any trouble imagining her as a professor who held a significant appointment in the sciences and also sat down and did her remarkable work. I don't think things would be inconsistent.
She might have been a Robin Wall Kimmerer, pioneering in the sciences and dazzling us with new observations that we can understand, even we who are not in those fields.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
She would have found ways for each to interpenetrate and express the other, like the way she used religion to qualify science and science to qualify religion.
Yeah.
She was conversant with both of them. But yeah, I love that the museum is gathering together examples from her library. Isn't that correct? I mean, she read everything. Not much got past her, I'm sure.
Yeah. And there certainly was a scientific revolution happening around her.
Right.
And that information came to her in different ways, perhaps, than it might have today. But this is a fascinating conversation. We do need to come to a close, so I'd like to maybe leave with one last question, which, you know, you three have been writing in community with each other. Marilyn, you called it a running club. I love it.
Running buddy.
Experienced poets and friends. You have a strong sense of the community that you're writing in, this poetry, global or more local community of poetry. What would your letter to a young contributor say to encourage a less experienced poet who especially might feel isolated coming out of the last couple of years?
Don't give up. Keep going, keep writing, and find poets. If you have to find them on the internet, find them on the internet. Listen to readings like this one. Find the books you need. Find the distant, Zoom lectures you need, and keep going.
And the community is not horizontal. You find your community by finding them in books. I mean, some of your, oh gosh, Emily Dickinson is my main buddy, but I never met her. But she's a part of my community. I'm sorry, I don't intend to insult Dolores or Terry, but she's a part of our communities as well. And I think people could be encouraged to look to the past for community. Find your peers who struggled with maybe things that you're struggling with now, 100 or 200 years before you were even dreamed of. So.
Yeah, be true and be confident in your own voice. However that comes out. Find colleagues, find comrades, find fellow poets that you can be really close with and have community with personally, but also it's like, Dickinson lives with us. I mean, we all have her inside us now. And it's really phenomenal when you think about it. I mean, just that little room is like the nucleus of the atom, and to think how it's spread, it's proliferated. Thanks a lot in part to Edith and the museum, but it's really I'm always so excited to think about what a growing phenomenon it is, the excitement and the scholarship and the community around Dickinson, the artistic output, tremendous source of music, visual art. I mean, it's something really explosive that I think we're all responding to. So
yeah, whether or not Dickinson's poetry would have thrived in our contemporary moment, it is now, right? And it's just the total joy of my career to be able to celebrate that with you, Terry Blackhawk, Dolores Hayden, Marilyn Nelson, and with all of you who have tuned in with us tonight. So thank you so much to these amazing poets. Thank you for your words and your insights and for uplifting us all together here. Links have been in the chat. We do encourage you to go find out more about these writers, buy their books, and come back for more. We hope that you'll join us next month. We have a Phosphorescence reading with Assamese poet Abhijit Sarma and Irish poet Anne-Marie Nichurin. And so we'll link to that in the chat now. We do this every month and we would love to see you back here. If you sign up for the museum's mailing list, you'll be among the first to hear about the date for the museum's late summer reopening. We're really excited to announce that. We hope to be able to do that very soon. So be sure to go and head to emilydickinsonmuseum.org to register, sign up for our mailing list, or make a donation in support of free programs like this one. Thank you again, Terry, Dolores, Marilyn. Good night, everybody. Take good care of yourselves and of each other.
Thank you, Brooke.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Good night, everyone.